Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to Real Talk, where we talk about real estate and real life. So it's a very exciting show. We want to talk about mindset, and especially right now in this market, how to get through this market that everybody's trudging through in Middle Tennessee. We've got a great guest today, my good friend Keith Samaroo. He's a builder and developer, and just has a lot of great insights, has a lot of experience, and with just what goes into being a developer and all the twists and turns and risks that you have to get into. So anyway, Keith, welcome.
Well,
good
thanks.
to have you.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on your second
right,
podcast.
yeah.
I feel very honored.
It's almost our first one, because the first one,
Oh, wow.
Megan was the guest.
Oh.
Not that Megan doesn't count.
Wow. Well, then there's more pressure than on me. But thank you for having me. And I've listened to many podcasts in the past, but never been a guest on one. So
Good.
looking forward to this. And this is great, because you and I always talk about real estate every time we see each other anyhow. So now to finally put it in format, on a platform is great. And I love talking to colleagues of ours, telling them about basically all of the pitfalls in real estate, of which I probably made a lot of those mistakes.
Well, I was down at Codes today.
Yeah.
We're trying to get a 4 build in East Nashville, and we were looking at height and footprint, building envelope, and to figure out how many square feet we could get there to determine the price of the lot, how much the lot was per door.
Yeah.
And then they come with stormwater. Even as small as this is, we're going to have to probably build a detention bond, because we're taking away pervious soil.
You have too much impervious coverage.
Impervious, yeah.
I built 4 ponds at my Madison project, of which each of them cost $60,000. So I feel the pain. I know what you're going through. Stormwater is a big issue here in Tennessee and the rest of the country. But I do remember, I think we have a good mayor, in Mayor Freddie right now. He's been pretty understanding of a lot of the policies and procedures that they currently have, and recognizing some of the shortfalls. So I've had some discussions with him.
That's great.
And he has some good ideas on how, and I mentioned a couple to him that maybe he should implement, namely some of the stuff that I had experienced back in New York, and more along the lines of prescriptive zoning. So we'll see. Got our fingers crossed. Hopefully he'll help
That's
us
something
out.
to watch. The new administration.
Yeah,
sure.
I think we're in good hands. So.
Because I think some folks weren't sure how developer friendly he would be. He voted against the Titan Stadium and those kind of things, and so that's going to be interesting to see how where he lands.
Well, it's funny because we always have this discussion about, and most communities, you'll find communities, nobody wants it in their own backyard, right? NIMBYism, and not in my backyard,
Right.
NIMBYism. And it's everywhere I've gone, in New York, it seems that it was more prevalent. I think they invented the term NIMBYism in New York, but the thing that I explain to people is that, hey, look, if your city and your community is not growing, in the form of economic development, well, then you're going to die, and you're dying, because you can't attract, the retailers, the fancy, restaurants, right? So, and those developers that require, headcount, they require traffic in order to build and come and be successful.
To justify,
So it's a little, I guess the pull and tug of residents that don't want higher traffic. And the one thing I say to them is like, hey, look, traffic is something that is very, it's almost a static problem, right? Because you can fix that problem. You can fix traffic concerns, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what you can't fix is keeping away economic development, right? Because if you shy and you push economic development away from your communities, well, it's never going to come back, So I think the key component there is that traffic is just another issue that can be engineered, with solid solutions, better traffic lights,
Right.
off-site improvements to roadways, widening roadways. So it's an engineered solution that you can handle, and that's how you get around this whole issue of trying to push or slow down growth.
Right. And yeah, you have to manage growth, but you have to keep growing. I
Of
agree with
course,
that.
yeah.
You talked about New York.
Yeah.
How different things they do there. You're from New York. Talk a little bit about being from New York and what part and kind of what you did
Yeah.
there and your family there, and then what
Yeah.
brought you to Nashville.
Well, we emigrated here back. My parents brought us, the whole family. I think I came over to New York when I was 12 years old.
Oh, really? Where were you born?
I was born in South America, in Guyana, South America. Lived on a farm. Yeah, can you believe it, right?
Yeah.
Farm boy, and we landed in.
We have farm boys here, but
it's
Guyana's a little different.
well, it's when I see the farms, it kind of like brings me back,
That's cool.
And we landed in the Bronx, so I came here when I was 12, and we were living in an apartment building, with my cousins, and it was a culture shock for me, coming from a 500-acre farm to a three-bedroom apartment in the Bronx, walking distance to Yankee Stadium.
Oh, that's cool.
I go outside and people are playing stickball. I don't know what the hell stickball was at the time, and and just getting into, and it was amazing how that, even though it was a culture shock, culture change for me. I just accepted it and and thrived in that culture. Lived in New York pretty much all my life. Grew up there and studied. I was very blessed. My family, my parents pushed education. So always into science. When I was growing up, and so I decided I got a physics degree. Thinking like, oh, geez, I'm gonna go into science. Then after graduating, I'm like, well, I
You have
don't
a
know.
college degree in physics?
In physics,
That
yes.
is awesome.
And I'm like, what am I going to do with this? I don't want to teach.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, fine. Decided to go back, spend another year getting an engineering degree in electrical engineering. And that's kind of where my heart was, because I've always loved, engineering, robotics, and electronics, and all of that. And at that time, the Defense Department were hiring a tremendous amount of engineers and so on. So after I got my engineering degree, actually my first job turned out to be not in the electronics or engineering aspect, but in the energy space. So I worked for an energy utility doing quantitative analysis, so, and probabilities of equipment failures and all of that stuff. So it was a interesting change, from my studies. Did that for a few years. Worked at a great company. This was during the time when, green design or green energy was not in vogue. This was back in the late '90s, 2000s. But just had a really good rooting of energy systems and how energy systems were involved in real estate buildings and real estate development. So that was a very early stage for me. They actually paid for me to go get my finance degree, my MBA. So I lucked out there. Just loved it. Graduated, sometime early 2000, getting my MBA. And it's amazing how people evolve, right? And you evolve, and
Yeah.
you take on different careers. And at the time, the CEO of a large engineering firm had contacted me and said, "Hey, we've seen what you've done, and we'd like to, have you build our New York division for us." I'm like, "Wow, that's pretty impressive." So they hired me, and I took on that job and helped them build they were a large powerhouse engineering firm, headquartered out in New Jersey, and fully capable in all facets of engineering, structural, civil, geotech, mechanical, electrical, and they also had an architectural group, mostly focused on real estate development. So at that time, I mean, it was, like I said, I was blessed because for the next 10, 12 years working in this company, I just worked with some of the best, and largest and smartest real estate developers. I was their consultant. So the amount of experience that I garnered within that first 10 years, was just tremendous. I learned every single aspect of real estate development, from waterfront development.
What asset classes were they?
We covered every single asset class, from multifamily residential, office buildings, warehouse, industrial. And of course, in New York had a lot of environmentally tainted properties. So one of the specialties of this engineering firm was actually working on brownfield sites. So I had a tremendous amount of experience working with developers on remediating sites. Amazing, really complicated stuff. Dealing with some of the nastiest sites and just bringing it back,
That's awesome, yeah.
into economic, and fruitful purpose.
So when you get a phase one environmental, you know what it's all about on that
Yeah,
part,
yeah. Well, unfortunately, we got into phase one, phase twos, phase threes, RECRAs.
Oh, shit, yeah.
Yeah, and I did vow that when I start my own company, that the minute I saw an environmentally tainted site, that I would run the other way. So.
Well, I'm thinking it would be the opposite. It's like find one, buy it for nothing, and remediate
Oh,
it.
well,
You
the challenge, and I saw it firsthand, is the amount of complication, the amount of science and reporting that goes into taking an environmentally contaminated site and bringing it up, to par, is just tremendous, because the EPA gets involved, and when the EPA gets involved, usually the state DECs get involved, and they work. I wish I could say they work in tandem, but they don't.
Yeah.
The amount of dollars that you spend are just tremendous. And at the time, New York State had a program actually called the Brownfield Remediation Program, where they would actually pay developers the full cost of remediating, of the horizontal remediation. So it was a tremendous opportunity for sites to be cleaned up and moved along. But again, it's like, maybe it's trauma for me, every time I see.
Well, there's really not
see
money
that.
in it because you don't know what you're getting into, really.
Yeah, and one of the things, and hopefully we can talk about that, is on the horizontal side, and I talk about, in real estate development, you probably hear about two things, right? Horizontal side and the vertical side, right?
Horizontal is moving the dirt, getting the
site plans,
sewer,
yep.
water.
Yep. And so when I talk about horizontal, that's the whole site design,
Design.
And that's in my opinion, that's where your equity is, right? That's where the value of a developer comes into play. The vertical side, it's a little more straightforward, because the architect will build to the market spec, and you'll build it per dollars per square foot, so you know what the market accepts. So there's very little complexity in that. So I just think that the horizontal is a little more intricate and complicated, and that's where I think the value can be made, or you lose money.
Right.
So,
Well, I talked to a builder one time, and just like an old builder, it's like, it's all about the foundation. What's your foundation
Yes,
cost?
yes.
And if you got to do a lot of site prep before you even start the foundation,
Oh, yeah.
you're kind of behind the eight ball
Yeah.
going vertical.
right, right.
You know?
And it's tremendous. One of the things that I forgot to mention is that back in in my experience training, one of the things, my philosophy is basically served. We talked about site and we talked about environmental remediation, but and the reason that that's so important is because what you're trying to do is bringing back properties into fruitful use, right? And then there's a certain level of sustainability that's involved in doing that. And my training in New York was actually, it was back in the days, primarily about sustainability. How do we make a project sustainable for the environment? Now you think about it, any project that we build probably will last, 50, if it's built well, maybe 75 years,
Sure.
right? So you're really taking, a big step in changing the entire environment for 50 to 75 years. That's tremendous. So I think it's incumbent on, developers and consultants and every aspect of the development project, including yourself, I think to be mindful of sustainability. And back in New York, I was involved in the U.S. Green Building Council. We started the first chapter, a local chapter in New York for U.S. Green Building Council. Very, very proud of my involvement and work in that.
Well, see, that's the thing, remediating a brownfield.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're doing something good for the community.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, though. So how did that experience, working for an engineering firm, getting all that experience
Yeah.
on building all those asset classes, how did that transition into you building stuff for yourself?
Yeah. So, my parents, as I mentioned, we own apartment buildings in New York City, and primarily in Manhattan and Queens and Brooklyn. It's a small portfolio. My family.
Great location, though.
No, definitely some amazing locations. And I had looked with them for quite some time about expanding that portfolio in New York. But it was just very difficult to do business in New York. The value just wasn't there. The risk was tremendous. Just to give you an idea, to do a basic rezone in New York, takes about 6 years.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. Versus here in Nashville, average rezone is maybe 6 to 12 months,
Yeah.
right?
So
Although
we shouldn't be complaining about how long it takes to get rid
well,
of
well, we should, but
Yeah, exactly.
So New York was not an option for us to expand, and so then I started looking around the country. I looked into Florida quite a bit because I really love Florida. I mean, who doesn't love Florida, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think when you started looking at some of the issues involved, my concern with Florida was actually, the climate change that's going on in Florida, in a lot of communities that are on the water right now. Miami, southern Florida it's pretty much a lot of limestone, and if you think about it, it's hard to prevent water infiltration when you're built on limestone, right? Because it's so porous. Like, for example, in New York, we started building a lot of, walls around to make the waterfront a little more robust to water intrusion. But you can't do that in Miami, right? So the only option that they have to do is just, build a lot of pumping systems. So as the water table rises, you basically just pump that water out and so on. But that in a way, is an infrastructure tax, right? And I view that as, well, that's a cost to build infrastructure. And I just don't want to pay it, you know. So when you look at a project, you know, versus in Nashville versus in Miami, and you look at the cost per infrastructure per unit, you know, one's going to be much higher. And then you start looking at the tax rates, right? Well, you know, tax rates in Florida have gone, you know, tremendous.
Insurance,
you know?
too.
And insurance is now the biggest issue. Well, coincidentally, now insurance is tied to climate change.
Really, yeah.
Right? So you can't find insurance now for a lot of waterfront properties in Florida. So, you know, knock on wood, you know, I feel that we had chosen right by choosing Nashville. And Nashville just had some tremendous economic, you know, milestones and factors. They were on par with Texas, you know, as far as, because I did look into Texas as well. I looked in Austin, Texas,
Right.
and it was such a beautiful community, but I got the sense that the values for land just weren't there when you compared it to Nashville. So Nashville became the place that, you know, we focused on.
And
here.
what year was that when you came to Nashville?
This was 2018.
Yeah.
So the market was just about
Yeah.
to, you know, pick up pace.
Yeah, I think you picked a good city for a developer, you know, in
Yeah.
18.
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
you
just
know,
getting here, our studio's downtown. I mean, there's what, 5 cranes putting
Yeah,
up
yeah.
more buildings down here, which, yeah, that just shows the demand.
tremendous,
you know? Yeah.
tremendous demand, and you know, the sort of migration from the, I guess the coastal communities, from whether it be West Coast or East Coast, you know, moving to the Sunbelt cities, getting away from the taxes, getting away from, you know, the climate change, you know,
And the
sea rise.
And regulations a lot
Oh,
less
the
in
regulations
Tennessee.
are just brutal. So
Yeah.
yeah, so Nashville was a great choice for us, you know, and we ended up finding a great spot in Madison, and you know, I'd like to spend some time talking and telling you about Madison, because when I came here in 2018, you know, people looked at me and said, "Well, why Madison?" You know, it's like, you know, it's got high crime rates, you know, very high vacancy rates. But luckily, I didn't know many communities.
Well,
I
the
guess I
thing-
came here,
yeah.
you know, very naive, you know.
Well, the thing about it is, and I do want to talk about your projects in Madison and the projects in Clarksville and any other projects you got going. But I was born and raised here. So Madison to me was not so much high crime, it just wasn't, you know, high value.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
There were some places like where the Nations are now, that was high crime. East Nashville was high crime.
Yeah,
You know, still
yeah.
a little bit going on over there. But, you know, Madison was not, of course, you know, I guess Madison's sort of an extension of East Nashville.
Yeah, yeah.
In a way. And so really that's almost merging, because Inglewood's,
Yes.
you know, at first it was East Nashville, and then now they moved into Inglewood.
Yeah.
And you're just right on the other side of Briley Parkway.
Yeah. Yeah.
Talk about that project.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about, you know, choosing the site, raising the money, determining the product. You know, just these kind of things.
Yeah.
But the things that go into considerations on when choosing a place. But if we could, let me circle back real quick. What I want to talk about is, because this shows a lot, it's about real estate, but it's about real life. So talk a little bit about, and we really believe that, you know, it's important who you associate with, spend your time with. It's really a reflection on you. So talk a little bit about how you built community, or your network is your net worth.
Yeah.
When you came to Nashville, and then we'll talk about these two projects.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And I remember I was flying back and forth, you know, 2018, you know, from New York to Nashville, and a great person, by the way, and you know, we know him very well, Michael Gomez,
Yeah, with
Hive
Hive
Realty,
Realty, yeah.
would pick me up at the airport and drive me around. You know, we'd spend 2 days driving around
Looking for land?
looking for land, introducing me to communities. Michael has just been awesome and introduced me to my network. And I think that's how I met you, was through Michael. So he's become, a really good friend, family friend, and we stay in contact. As a matter of fact, him and I were out just yesterday, on the boat, talking real estate.
That's right.
But the two people that I relied quite a bit on was Michael Gomez and also Michael Winarski, who he actually introduced me to, and Michael built all my buildings in Madison. So the three of us had started way back on early, back in 2018, looking at this project. So, but I've always been fortunate enough, I think, to have a great network. And I recognize that there's a lot of things that I don't know, but there's very, almost 1 degree of separation that I can get to a really smart guy like yourself.
Right. Michael's got that.
Michael made that connection to you, and so my network was tremendous with the help of people like, Michael Gomez, Michael Winarski, yourself, and I rely on that network. My success in New York was the same thing. It was based on my network. So I am a huge proponent of just building, your network with some really strong people and good people, that you don't mind going out and having a beer or a hamburger, with afterwards. So Michael Gomez did find the site in Madison for me. And, I'm looking at the site. At the time, it was 5 acres, right off of Briley Parkway. There was like nobody in the area. It was all wooded. And, we're looking at the site thinking, well, okay, what can we do here? Fortunately, it had a vision plan already that the community had approved.
Oh, okay.
So I was buying.
So you had to get it rezoned?
Yeah, I bought an SP.
Right. It already had an SP in place?
Had a preliminary SP approved.
A special plan, so that's where you take your plans to codes and it's sort of just zoned for that. But there's some pitfalls with that. You've got to.
Oh, it's tremendous. I call it a cartoon because that's to get an SP approved, a preliminary SP approved doesn't take much, right? Very little engineering involved. So that's what I bought. I call it a vision plan, if you will. But it had been blessed by the Councilwoman Van Rees, which she's been fantastic in helping me, be successful at that project. But then we spent almost a year in designing the site and engineering the site. And that's where I think the challenges come in. And you talk about that, right?
But you'd already bought the land.
Oh, we bought the land. And then we started engineering and design right after that. So this was back in 2018. It took us about it.
And that's really your wheelhouse, the engineering and design part.
Yeah. Luckily, I was fortunate enough to, I found some really good engineer. He had been involved. Barry Cleveland at TTL. He had been involved in the whole visioning plan and stuck with him, and they helped design the site. Good firm. We also found a really good architect through the network, and we started marketing, designing, submitting, and 2019 we broke ground. And 2019 the market was just about to pick up. And we were designing and building 35 townhomes in Madison, right? And at the time, people told me, even my banker, and I tease him all of the time, he said, well, I don't think you're going to get more than, $350 for those townhomes. I'm like, okay, that's cool. So I did all my financial analysis based on $350 and $395. That was my swing. And we started selling, And it took about a couple of months to get our first contract. And we landed, our first contracts were about $395. So we kind of nailed our first, hurdle, and built them, delivered it, moved on to the next phase. Next phase, the markets, started to get a little more active, and we started pre-selling. And we were quickly into the 400s at that point, and we're selling out. And then, of course, late into 2019, 2020, the market really went out of control, It was a point in time that I told Michael Winarski, I'm like, I wish we could build faster, I mean, if we were a machine, and we can get these units out.
Work 24/7.
Yeah, in less than 6 months, because him and his team were fantastic. They were building units in about 6 months. And I said, man, if we can just speed this up, get to market faster. But the realities of it all, so we basically sold out from the ranges were $395 to the last unit that sold at $650.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, and so it was a tremendous opportunity for us, a tremendous
It was a
feather
good
in our
opportunity
cap.
for the first buyers too.
Oh, everybody has achieved tremendous equity appreciation in their units. And then we started into the second phase. The second phase were just basically 2 apartment buildings, 46 units that we turned into student housing with Nosy College. Fantastic opportunity to partner with Nosy College and provide, needed.
Well, the thing
dorms.
about it is what you're talking about. You partner with Nosy College of Art, which
Yeah.
is a long-standing, well thought of art school here in Nashville. But I'm just thinking about, as you're talking, going and buying, looking at the 5 acres in Madison, buying it,
Right.
engineering it,
Yeah.
trying to figure out the product, because you kind of had a unique product with the rooftop garage door decks situations, and you don't even know if you can sell one. You're in Madison. People are telling you that Madison's nowhere to be.
Yeah.
And just talk a little bit about what goes through the butterflies in your stomach or whatever.
The sleepless nights.
The sleepless nights, because what if you build it and you can't sell one?
You can't sell it.
It's just like that's developers. It's a very interesting.
Yeah.
And really, when I hear people a lot of times in the community talking about developers, if they're talking about traffic or something like that, it's never developers. It's greedy developers. But they're not thinking about all the risk that the developer's taking. And when I was contrasting that with, you build apartments in conjunction with a college. The risk is a lot less.
Yeah,
because they're already pre-rented
Right.
for it was student housing dorms. But just coming from New York, buying 5 acres in Nashville, that's just so much.
Risk. Definitely a lot
Just
of.
talk about how you handle that emotionally.
Yeah, sure. Definitely a lot of sleepless nights. I guess it gets back to the philosophy that I have, which was, obviously, matured in New York. And the whole philosophy, I think, is real estate development philosophy, is that people want these mixed-use villages. A lot of buyers, customers, they want areas where it's no longer, auto-centric, it's pedestrian-friendly, right? So I was attracted to this site because the vision plan was designed as a village, right? It's called Creative Way Village, right? Because it's a mixed-use community, mixed use being we have townhomes, we have apartments, and a commercial retail, we're about to start that. So what I found is, through my experience, those are the most successful developments going on in our country right now. And there's a lot of experience and success. You can look at most college towns. Most college towns are the most, successful areas around. There's so much, vibrancy, right? Just kids walking around. And if you think about it, college areas, college towns are designed for people-to-people interaction, right? But then when you get outside of those college towns, you get into suburbia, and then it's very auto-centric, right? I jump in my car, from my home. I drive 5 minutes to go get my coffee or get my lunch, and dry cleaners, and then I drive back, right? But that's not the case in these college towns. So it's a specific focus towards pedestrian-friendly communities. So that was my focus coming here.
Well, I think it helped that this particular lot, and I don't know what they paid for it and what they sold, but just getting the initial SP, the council person on board, the vision, that really gave you a little bit more confidence in that site.
Yeah, it definitely does, and I think it's a little more complicated to build as a developer, just because you have different moving parts and different product styles. Certain banks don't want to, invest in apartments. Certain banks don't want to invest in townhomes. So it's a little more complicated, but when you talk about the risk, and I see, the mixed-use village as a way to mitigate my risk, because I know that it's in a higher demand community, or it's a community that I will get demand for my product. So
have you ever been out to Lenox Village and
Yes.
Sort of region?
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, when he did
Tremendous.
that back then,
Yeah.
nobody even know what he was talking about.
Tremendous.
But
yeah.
the whole concept is the walkability and the
Walkability.
the emphasis on automobiles.
Yeah, I mean, we have a few things. I think West Haven is another great.
That's a great one. Yeah,
great product.
and two great builders there too,
yeah.
with Regent Homes did Lenox, and the guy that did Fern that did West
Haven. Yeah, I don't recall.
Southern Land.
Southern.
I think,
Just some great product, and we have some great developers here in Nashville, which is awesome and sort of inspiring to see some of really good developers coming to Nashville, from New York, from Chicago, California, Florida, just coming to Nashville because of the opportunity that they see here. So tremendous opportunity to work here in Nashville. As far as, the risks, so what do you look at? I mean, I think the primary thing that you want to look at is accessibility, right? And when I looked at this site in Madison, it had the best accessibility. I'm literally in 30 seconds, I'm on Briley Parkway.
Yeah. And Briley Parkway is going straight to 40 and 65.
Yeah. So Creative Way Village, we are literally 8 minutes into downtown, So access, I always look at, is just tremendous. Access to the highways, because even though it is still, pedestrian-friendly community, people still want the ability to, shop.
Well, they want to go downtown.
Go downtown, party,
see Titans or whatever.
Correct, yeah. So that's important. Accessibility is important. And of course, you have to look at what are you going to sell at.
Another big thing that people are talking about is affordable housing.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about your next project and how you were able to get that involved with that.
So, first of all, the one thing I'd like to suggest is if our community here can change the name from affordable housing to something else, call it
workforce
attainable
housing,
workforce housing, inspirational housing, just because affordable housing has
they don't want it in their backyard.
Such a negative connotation, right? So, so we'll work on that. We'll get we'll get Megan to work on that.
Yeah.
She can change that. But we're working on a project in Clarksville right now. Great community, and it's 120 units, townhome units. of which we are hoping will be 40 to 50% of workforce housing. I think it's important for us.
40 to 50% of the whole project's going to be workforce?
Correct.
I didn't realize
Yeah.
that. How many units?
120 units. So we're looking to do about 55 units of workforce housing. And we're actually in negotiations right now with a large affordable housing company entity to partner with us on that. So hopefully we'll get that approved by the end of the year, and we'll make an announcement, and we can break ground in beginning of the year.
Sounds great.
But yeah, I think workforce housing, affordable housing is tremendous for our community.
Okay, one of the things I'm getting into is real estate investing. I've invested in some RV parks.
Sure.
We've talked about that. The person that I'm doing it with, he has a fund, which actually was or is a sort of a serial syndication situation where you take each project and you raise the money from accredited investors for the down payment. Generally, the banks
Sure.
are going to lend you 70% of what it's going to take. That's what it is in RVs. So
Yeah,
we'll just use
yeah.
that as an example. So you got to either have yourself
Yes.
the 30%,
Yeah.
or you've got to raise it.
Right.
So there's two things there. One, getting the financing, which, that's a challenge just with the banks, because you were talking about earlier different asset classes this particular bank may be into or not into, because they got burned on this class
That's right.
one time and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. But raising the money for the projects, I'm really interested in. I'd like to start a fund where I could put my friend, I could put your project on there, I could put just different
Yeah.
friends' projects on there, plus my projects. So, talk a little bit about raising money and getting financing on, say, a creative way.
Yeah. Well, I think, putting aside, where the value, the dollars are created on the site work and the horizontal, I think the financing aspect is probably a second most important facet as to where you're going to make, a profit. And you really, I think, need to understand that and work with good people, even good bankers that can help you, because, you've heard me say, the capital stack, right? The cap stack. And that's the most important thing is your cap stack, right? And just to understand what the cap stack is, right? Typically,
Yes, tell us what that is.
75% is typically a bank, right? They'll give you a senior position loan on 75%. Well,
So if it costs
say it's
$1
$1 million.
$1 million to build it, they'll
Right.
lend you $750. So where are you getting the other
750?
$250? Unless you could write
That's
a
a
check for it.
great question, right? And
And the bigger the project, because the
Yes.
100 units, that's going to be, what's the bill cost going to be, just ballpark on that?
100 units, you're probably looking at about a 30 million project,
So then now you're looking for $3 million, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah.
So I think, the cap stack is tremendous. So, put aside, the senior debt. So that balance there is the equity portion, right? And typically, you're going to see about a 10% of that balance of the 25% in your land, right? You purchase the land and you've done improvements to the land, you got it approved, you have engineering documentation. So you'll get about a 10, 15%.
So let's just say,
right?
for example, you buy the land, you did what the seller did at Creative Way Village, and talk to the council person, get it zoned, really
Correct.
get it entitled.
Yeah.
So you bought it for $1 million, and now it's worth $2 million with all the entitlements attached to it. So the $1 million in equity you've got in the land
Right.
is part of your debt. It's part of your 25% down payment.
Correct.
So that's 10% of it. So you
Right.
still got to raise the 15.
You still have to raise the 15, and I think this is the hardest part, right? That LP equity, limited partnership equity, that's the hardest part, and I think that's where you talked about syndications.
Yeah, well, I was talking about my fund. Basically, the general partner has the 30%, and
Yeah.
then the limited partners, who you rate, even though they raise the 30%, they get the 70%.
Correct.
And so that's and the reason they're limited partners is if it goes completely south and you lose $10 million, they don't lose it. They lose their investment, but they don't lose.
Yeah.
They don't have any. They don't share in the losses.
For a beginner developer.
Right.
And
that's what I want to talk about.
That's the trickiest part. And so the only, first of all, the only source is if you're a starting out developer, you're going to look to friends and family.
Right. And you're going to be doing smaller projects.
Yeah, you're going to do smaller projects,
bills.
right? And usually once you have some experience, banks will up your LTC, loan to construction,
cost.
loan
How
to
much money
cost,
they'll lend you.
and or LTV to 85%. They jump from 75 to 85. We got 85% over in Creative Way. So
That's awesome.
Plus we had pushed in a lot of cash into the acquisition. But that is the hardest part is getting that equity, and that is the secret sauce right there. If you can get that equity at a very low cost, most LP investors are looking for double-digit returns. You're looking for 12 to 15%. So when you take all of your LP investor and you take your senior note provider, the bank, you're looking at a cost of capital of, say, maybe 10%. So you have to factor all of that in. What is your total cost of capital?
So it's not
into a project.
It's not just the interest carry; it's the limited partner equity.
Correct.
That you've got to account for.
Yeah.
And that's really almost like cost of interest.
Totally. It's
You just don't have to pay it up front.
You just don't have to pay it up front. And that can sometimes be, more costly than your senior debt, because certain guys want ownership. And so you'll have to pay them a preferred rate. So,
right.
Say
you have to pay that. You do have to pay that. That is an interest carry, really, because when you bring the limited partners in, they want to be getting 8% or something like that.
More like 12%.
Yeah, 12. Okay, yeah.
12% preferred, right? And now that's a preferred interest rate over the length of construction.
But they also get some equity.
And they get a kicker
Right.
on the back, right? Mm-hmm. And the way the kicker works, and this gets a little complicated, is they call it a waterfall, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you know that. And the waterfall...
Explain the waterfall, because I'm not sure exactly.
Yeah, so the waterfall typically works, it's like almost like... I'll break it down into like
All right,
two...
I'm going to put $100,000 into your project.
Right.
I'm going to get 12% paid quarterly.
Correct.
I don't know how long when you pay your pref. And then what am I going to get at the end?
So
for $100,000.
So for that $100,000, so typically, you'll get your 12% on that $100,000 during the course of construction. So let's say it's 2 or 3 years, you'll get your 12% every year on that 100. But then they ask for a kicker, right? And that kicker usually comes in, and the breakdown is something like you get a profit on that $100,000 or whatever profits bucket that comes up with. And let's say, for easy numbers, it's $100,000. Well, the investors want to see maybe up to 70% of that first profit. So the LP investor gets 70% of it, and the developer gets 30%. And then once you hit,
let's say there's $100,000 in profit, just from easy numbers.
Yeah. So you set a target.
And you've sold the last one.
Right. You set a target, right? And the target is, or these thresholds, it's called, right? So the first, say, 20, like we'll do two targets, two thresholds. So the first 50%, they get 70% of it, okay, and you get 30%. The next threshold, right, the balance of the 50% of the profits, it flips. So the developer gets 70% and the investor gets 30%. And there's many versions of that waterfall, but that's a typical waterfall.
And what it's saying is, the better the project does,
Correct.
The developer gets more.
Correct. It gets more,
and so does the investor.
Yeah. So
because once you hit the first waterfall, you've really completed what you were projecting.
Correct.
And you get above that waterfall, that's just icing on the cake.
It's icing
right?
on the cake. Yeah. So, but that's the cost of LP equity, and as you can see, that's a very expensive cost of capital. That could be 15-20% cost of capital. So you can understand why most developers want to maximize their senior debt from a bank, because that's smaller. That's a lot smaller.
They don't want to participate.
Yeah, today that's 8%.
Right.
Right? And 8%, granted, 8% on a 75% cap stack, but that balance, you're paying almost 20-25% on the balance. So just to sum things up, the cap stack and the financing is very, very important. What gets also more complicated is when you start dealing with multifamily projects, and now you're talking about 3 loans, right? First, you have a construction loan. Second, you have once the construction is done, you typically get a mini perm, right? And then once the mini perm is done and the building is stabilized, then you go out and get a permanent loan, typically agency financing.
On a hold.
Yeah, on a hold, an apartment building.
Are the apartment buildings in Creative Way, are you holding those?
Yeah, we're holding.
Oh, I didn't realize that. That's great.
Yeah.
Because that's just recurring
Yeah.
income, forever.
Yeah,
Or whatever, 50
you-
years.
That's been our strategy, is basically multifamily long-term holds.
Because that's what you were doing in New York, right?
Correct. Yeah, we have not sold any of our assets off in New York.
Let me say something about the about the investor, and we'll wind it up.
Yeah.
Once you do a project with an investor, though,
Yeah.
and they get their 12% preferred return, and they get a nice
Kicker.
a nice, say $50,000 on their 100,000 plus the 12% interest. They're just saying, let it ride. What's the next project? Because you can really build that up
Oh,
if
sure.
you deliver
Yeah.
what you promised.
Well, this gets back to your network, right?
Yeah.
Prove yourself, and they'll keep flowing. Because
Yeah.
if they're
And they'll tell their friends.
and they'll tell their friends,
Yeah.
if you're giving them 20% returns,
Yeah.
annual returns every year, who wouldn't take that,
Yeah.
right?
So if you're needing a 20% annual return, call us seriously. We're looking for investors and just folks that are interested in that. We really have a heart to share our experiences. We're not, we have an abundance mentality. We have the same values. That's what makes us friends. And the abundance mentality is just there's enough for everybody. We're not keeping secrets from anybody. We don't know any more than anybody else.
Yeah.
We're just trying to share and make everybody happy. And that's really the purpose of this show, Real Talk, which is about real estate, and it's about real people and real life. So thanks for bringing a lot of real life and some real estate to the show. Appreciate everybody watching. Please comment wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe, and we look forward to bringing some more great podcasts. Thank you.